Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Eric Reed, how you doing? Nice to see you there with the keyboard in the background.
Yes, and my lovely coffee mug here. I am wonderful, having the time of my life. The semester has just started, the spring semester, and hit the ground running. Had a nice long break, and we're entering the year with what looks like some semblance of normalcy. I had to pinch myself.
Yeah, what's that? What's normal?
Right. How about that? But yeah, I'm glad to be alive, Todd. These last 4 years have been intense. They've been scary, frustrating, horrifying. But at the end of it, I'm like, you know what? I'm actually glad I went through it. I feel like I'm better for it, stronger. I understand things more, clearer. There's more clarity on things that I might have been on the fence about. We made it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, it's like peeling back the gauze. That's what
Mhm.
I feel like America kind of did, or I did,
Sure.
me personally, or whatever.
Yeah.
But kind of like
Yeah.
peeling back the gauze and okay, let's see what's there, because if you
That's
keep the
right.
bandage on and hide it, we'll never know. And now I feel
That's
like
right.
we kind of got a little, oh, okay, this is what we need to treat, and this is what the diagnosis might be.
Absolutely. Can we heal this? Does it need another stitch? We got to redress the wound, all that kind of stuff. It's always important for us to do these spot checks on our own existence.
Yeah. And as a musician, when you're making a record, does this process also play out there as well? Like, you're having to make choices about what you're going to choose, what tunes you're going to play, how you're going to play them, who's going to play them. I mean, those are a lot of questions you have to ask, especially given the times.
Circumstances are always, circumstances abound. They certainly impact how the record's going to turn out. I wasn't trying to travel. Normally, I'd be recording in New York City. So since I was living in Los Angeles at the time and I wasn't trying to travel because of COVID, I said, I got to find musicians here. And that wasn't hard to do because they got great musicians out in Los Angeles. Just a matter of finding the ones that were going to be uh, the best fit for the music that I was writing. And of course, the times we were in also had a large impact on what I composed and what I arranged in the song selection. COVID and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the political climate, all of that had a great deal to do with the songs that I selected for the record.
And the record's called For Such a Time as This. And, when a record with that kind of a title comes in, I always love it because I feel like, okay, someone's speaking to me about right now. And of course, that's what this record is. When did you actually record it, and when did it actually come out?
I recorded it at the end of June and it came out in November. I believe like right before Thanksgiving, I think.
And you know this, but our listeners might know this. It's insider baseball, but your record has been #1 for 3 weeks on the jazz
Wow.
charts.
How wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, WUOT. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tabor. I'm forgetting some other names. Please forgive me. Jazz radio has been such a crucial component, a crucial cog in jazz music in particular, aside from the jazz industry at large, because jazz music ain't part of the music industry. But jazz music and jazz radio, that's just like the best marriage, because you all really put the hours in and you listen to, I can't imagine how many CDs you must get on a weekly basis of music that you have to program. So I always am very, very appreciative of jazz, of jazz radio stations for playing our music. And I still have my membership with WBGO, and I have now started a membership with WUOT.
Why, Eric, let me ask you this. Why do you think this record in particular has resonated across the country in a way that it has?
I can only speculate that, music, people use music and they need music to take their minds off of some other things, or to allow them to focus on these things and maybe see some different perspective. So if you think about Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, or Aretha Franklin, Amazing Grace, or you think about Bob Dylan's work, you think about artists who, and Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? That's probably the classic one that was time specific. Marvin Gaye came out of Motown and he was singing, Heard It Through the Grapevine and those wonderful songs with Tammy Terrell, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. But What's Going On, Marvin was making a statement. And that's not to say that artists don't make statements every time they record, but this particular album of Marvin Gaye's resonated with the entire world, certainly with America, because he was speaking directly to what was going on at the time. And I believe these are the types of songs and records that get made. These ones that speak to people's situations are the ones that that tend to have the most impact, I believe.
And it's also, I guess I would throw in my own theory that it's just so good to listen to. I mean, it's a really nice recording, a nice sounding recording. It's really rich, and I actually really like the variety of it, because you kind of hit on it, like, some music just sort of take you away and some music take you in. And some solo piano stuff there, that you have a vocalist on one track.
Yes.
And a nice mix of originals and covers. But if you were the programmer, if you were the radio programmer, which of the songs on this record would you say, this should be the one that should be on the radio?
Oh my goodness. I often see on-air hosts, DJs, as performers. Oftentimes I'll have a set list of music that I want to play, and I generally will play off of that. But my emotions shift and I feed off of the audience. You got to read the audience. You don't have an audience that's like interacting with you. You're feeding to the audience. So you're kind of helping them to shape their mood. But I've got to feed off of the audience and see where their energy is. Is it time for another up-tempo song? Is it time for a soft song? I might do 2 or 3 ballads back to back. And oftentimes the audience just goes crazy because they love those slow, pretty things. So that's difficult for me to answer. I kind of have to go based off of what's happening at the moment. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that one.
Yeah. Well, I would answer it it's always interesting for me, because each of the hosts here on Improvisations program their own shows, total freedom. And we've all chosen different songs off the record to play. And it's usually the opposite. Usually like, oh, this is the one. Yes. So I think that's another strength. I've been playing Waltz.
Okay.
That's what I've been playing lately. I know Chris has been playing Western Rebellion. Ben's been playing, I think he played It's You or No One. But okay. Let's start with Waltz, because I chose it. Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me about that tune and what brought that one about.
It was a composition that germinated from about 3 or 4 bars of this kind of really dark and morose kind of intent or impetus. And I initially had entitled it Grave Waltz. Grave as in sad, but also grave as in an actual grave. And you've heard people say, when so-and-so dies, I'm gonna dance on his grave, And someone had died around the time I started writing that song, but I felt like dancing on their grave, but not in a rejoicing, celebratory manner. It was more a solemn kind of, I'm paying homage, I'm paying tribute, more body movement, not so much about a dance, but more just the movement of my body expressing the celebration of this person's life on their grave. I know it's kind of morose there, macabre, but something happened, and then I stopped writing the song and something else came up. So I just had those 4 bars. And then Wallace Roney died, and I was reminded again of that same celebration of life kind of vibe. And I picked it back up and then finished it out.
I love how the album starts out with this short piece. And that's another, like, you know, one of the rules, like, okay, a quiet, reflective piece. It's called a paradox piece. I would love to get your thinking on where this beautiful little piece came from and why you chose to just launch the record with it instead of like the big, fast, hard-hitting, swinging song.
Sure. Hopefully, I'm continuing to evolve as an artist and as a composer and as a arranger, producer, writer, as a human being, most importantly. And more of the recordings that I make, I want to begin to include every facet of my skills. And I want it to just be a musical experience, not necessarily always something that's like, this is a jazz album because it has this tempo, this kind of groove. I'm trying to give myself permission to be versatile in my artistic approach. So my earlier records, when I was younger, you know, I was always told you gotta have a track on there that's gonna, you know, hit folks right out the gate. You gotta gotta get their attention. And that's certainly valid, but every artist evolves in his own, you know, along his own path. So I was, once COVID hit and the quarantine was initiated, I went out. It was raining real bad. Well, I love rain, so it was raining real good in Los Angeles. And it was about 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. When I was just driving around, I was like, wow, this is kind of eerie and kind of beautiful. It was raining. It had cleared some things away. Nobody was on the street, but it was gorgeous. The reason that it was gorgeous was a messed up reason. There was a pandemic afoot. But there's this beauty. Thelonious Monk wrote Ugly Beauty, or you get beauty from ashes, you know, all that symbolism there. So I called it Paradox Piece. It's a paradox piece, P-I-E-C-E, that there's this kind of peace, P-E-A-C-E, in the midst of this turbulent situation. That's the paradox, that I would find beauty in this really negative situation.
Yeah, and that's a discussion I've had with a lot of friends that, you know, since the pandemic started, I've had a lot more, you know, I've had a lot of positives out of it, which, you know, you feel a little guilty about when you think about all people suffering and how devastating it's been, especially to, you know, people musicians that lose their job, people lose their lives. But yet at the same time, you know, I've spent a lot more time just playing music at home, enjoying music at home, and reading more and slowing down and cutting out things. It's been weird because there's been a lot of, I hate to even say it out loud, but there's been a lot of things I've kind of got a lot out of in the last year that I might not have gotten without the damn pandemic, you know?
Very true. No, I totally agree with you there, Todd. The thing about this pandemic, it was if you're an introvert like I am, the pandemic is like, well, that's just, you know, that's just a normal day for me. Not going out and not interacting with people. Okay, cool. I could do that. And it's not an antisocial thing. You just, you know, introverts just, they do well on their own. I felt really bad for the people who thrive, who feed off of social interaction, like people who need to be around other people. That messed those folks up, and a lot of those folks were not okay. So I had to check in on a lot of people just to say, hey, listen, let's talk, let's engage. You know, get me on the video chat, and you can see my face, because some folks, they're social butterflies. They need to be around other people. So this pandemic really messed a lot of people up.
Yeah, my wife told me, he's like, you've been training for this for years.
Exactly. Yes.
Like, yeah, totally. I'm afraid so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you go from Paradox Piece and then straight into Western Rebellion. Western Rebellion. I you know, I try to guess sometimes what the title means, but I'm not going to. I'll just let you tell me.
Western Rebellion. Let me see. Now I forgot how that even came about. It had a different title, something alluding to the West Coast, because we're, you know, West Coast musicians, and I'm very much into the West Coast jazz musicians, Harold Land and Frank Butler and Gerald Wilson and Carl Perkins and Hampton Halls. I'm very much into that sound. And I've always tried to celebrate it and keep it a part of my music, so having grown up in Los Angeles. It has something to do with the West Coast, Western Rebellion, I guess. Oftentimes when people think of West Coast jazz music, they usually think of people like, Chet Baker and Jerry Mulligan, and they think about the music being like, like super laid back. Some folks think it's like kind of jive and kind of corny. So I think the piece that I wrote, and considering the musicians that I used, I was trying to kind of destroy or diminish that concept of West Coast jazz being this kind of wimpy sound.
Yeah, well, then now you got like Kamasi Washington and people like that coming out, like definitely not wimpy sounding. I mean, that stuff's like loud and huge.
For sure. But not really in the West Coast jazz vein.
Right.
When I'm speaking specifically more of people like Harold Land, Teddy Edwards, Dexter Gordon, who is a West Coast guy. I mean, he got his start and his foundation, at Jefferson High. I think he went to Jefferson High. Buddy Collette. This was a serious group of folks who were really, really hitting real hard. Curtis Counts, Leroy Vinegar. These guys were no joke.
Yeah, Curtis Counts, man. I love his stuff. And if you go back, and of course you're going to know like about a million times more about all of this. So anyone listening, keep that in mind. But that's, there was always that sort of New York snobbery, right? About,
sure,
like that was always played into it. Is that still going on today, or is that kind of gone?
Well, there's definitely still a New York, Los Angeles, or East Coast, West Coast kind of rivalry that's, I think, inherent in every aspect of the cultures: fashion, music, the arts, just the way people think, the intensity of New York. Los Angeles is different kind of intensity that's not as intense as Los Angeles, as not as intense as New York City, but maybe more intense than a slower or smaller city. So there's always that East Coast, West Coast thing. It was in rap music, the acting industry, Broadway, New York, and then Los Angeles theater work, film, TV. Los Angeles is still the place to be for TV and film, and of course New York for stage, and some TV and film. But LA has Hollywood, right? But when people think of LA, they mostly think of Hollywood. So they tend to not take it very seriously. And I was talking with my brother. My brother's also a musician and also a school teacher. He teaches middle school. And he's been really helping me out and tutoring me on my approach to academia. And we were both talking about the fact that, in New York City, they'll tell you to your face, I can't stand you. I think you're a great musician and I'll be on stage with you. But off the stage, I don't want to talk to you. And if somebody's going to stab you in the back, somebody in New York, they'll stab you in the back and pat you on the shoulder and say, hey, that was me that stabbed you in the back. In Los Angeles,
I want my knife back.
I want my knife. Thank you very much. Wipe the blood off, but then in Los Angeles, they'll talk to your face like, man, you're the greatest ever. I mean, I just love you. Get off stage and talk trash about you. And then they'll stab you in the back while hugging you, telling you, man, I just think you're fantastic. And then they'll walk away and then you'll be like, what is this? This is a knife in that. Where'd this knife come from? And I know that's an ugly cliche, but that's certainly been my experience. And it's been the experience of a lot of people that I know that have lived in both places or that have existed in both places.
Wow. Well, I guess, I can't wait for the Knoxville music scene to come back to life. I mean, it's too small for people to get away with any kind of stabbing, I think. I mean, it's such a small community and everybody knows everybody and generally gets along great from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. Are you just itching to get out to play? Or are you kind of enjoying taking a break?
Yeah, I'm enjoying taking a break. This whole thing, the way it worked out, with where I was in 2019, and then being invited to come and teach at UT, and then accepting the job, the pandemic hitting, and then moving. I was so ready to dial back my road activity because I was just getting tired. I was just getting tired of being on planes all the time. And I was trying to find a way to take my experience and my expertise and share that with younger musicians. I wasn't 100% certain I wanted to do it at a university, but the offer and the decision confirmed that that's what I needed to be doing for this season.
Well, welcome back again. And you know, you talked about West Coast musicians, and one of the names that didn't pop up in that is actually my favorite West Coast born musician, composer and bass player, Charles Mingus.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And so I would go out on a limb and say I'm sure the song Thelonious is half Mingus, half Monk, right? That's what that's from.
It's a third Mingus, third Monk, and then a third me.
Oh yeah.
But I couldn't fit my name into the little portmanteau. I couldn't figure that out. But yeah, you know, I started writing that song. That was right when they were start talking about physical distancing. They were like, okay, stay 6 feet away from each other, keep your mask on, wash your hands, all that kind of stuff. And I was walking down the street, and this older couple was walking towards me, and I was kind of moving over to the side. They moved to the side, but they were near some shrubbery, and they jumped into the bushes, literally jumped into the bushes to keep from being close to me. I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'm taking this seriously, but for crying out loud, you two, you know, you can get hurt jumping around in bushes at your age, you know. But the song, when they did that, I had a soundtrack. I what's it called? I scored that little scene. So I had this soundtrack in my head where the music went boom, 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 jumping around, and that's how Thelonious. That's the nascence of it. It's got these wide intervals. How's it go? Ba ba da beep ba be e do da e ah. Right, so it moves around like that. So that's that leaping around. That's sort of more monkish, and then the bridge is closer to Mingus. We also talking about West Coast jazz musicians. I left out Eric Dolphy and Billy Higgins, who lived within a block of each other. They were born within a block of each other. And Eric Dolphy loved to incorporate those intervals in his playing and in his writing as well.
You know, when they had the 100th anniversary of the birth of Monk, and there were just a million celebrations. You've done, I believe, 3 Monk records, wonderful collections. And I sometimes wonder about Mingus. You know, I felt like when I was growing up that in my own head, I kind of equated those two as like, you know, those are my 2 favorites when I was growing up. And now I just feel like Monk is sort of like taken the ball and run into the end zone and spiked it. Whereas I feel like Mingus, in a way, he hasn't quite held on to the fame of what he did. Is that just my imagination, or I don't still hear that many people covering Mingus anymore?
Mingus, you're right. Everything you just said, I believe, is spot on. And I've never really given it much thought. My personal feeling on Charles Mingus's music is I always longed for, when I heard those recordings, I always longed for a sound that was a bit more organized and streamlined. It always seemed to be sort of a catch as catch can kind of thing when I would listen to those records. A sense of uneasiness. And from everything that we've read and have heard about Charles Mingus, he was not the easiest person to deal with, and could probably perhaps sometimes be violent and certainly very intimidating. So there always seemed to be this sense of uneasiness in the recordings, you know. But then Thelonious Monk wasn't the easiest person to understand, although he might not have been as vitriolic in his behavior as Mingus. But sort of 2 sides of the same coin, you know. With Monk, it was even harder because Monk wouldn't give you any music. At least Mingus would give you music, but he'd also followed up with "Don't mess up my music," And then Monk wouldn't mind you playing wrong notes at all. He just wanted you to play the music. So with Mingus, I think it was the vision. I'm not quite sure musicians and audiences captured the vision. Monk's vision was always clear. Mingus's vision requires a bit more delving into. I think. I could be wrong. I haven't really given it that much thought, but that's always been my feeling about Mingus's music and how it's impacted me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a recording at UCLA where he actually comes up on he actually throws a couple of the guys off the stage and says, "Go out in the hands on the sheet music, go out in the lobby and practice." And it's actually on the recording. He's like chastising him. So maybe, and he had such a big vision. A lot of those pieces, septets and octets and things like that. Yes. And there's a lot more chances for things not maybe being pulled off as flawlessly, especially in those days, those, like recordings, well, not unlike the present day, okay, we got the studio for 4 hours.
Yeah.
This is it. And there's a lot of sloppy edits on some, like Tijuana Moods, I believe. There's a lot of sloppy edits on those recordings and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what Mingus needed, I mean, he had a real trooper in Sue Mingus. But from Eric Reed's own personal assessment, Mingus needed a copyist, a producer, and a personal assistant. Sue, I reckon, was certainly fulfilling the manager, booking, personal assistant role. But I doubt that Mingus could be tamed in that. I don't want to say controlled, because he absolutely couldn't be controlled, but I doubt that he could be tamed in that manner where Mingus would be receptive to someone else dealing with authority that Mingus delegated to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the vision that I'm talking about with regard to his music and the creation and manifestation of his music, bringing his music to the absolute greatest fruition. It's like, listen, Mingus, I'm going to sit with you, and you and I are going to iron all this out. I'll copy it. I'll get it to the cats. I'll rehearse the band. I'll get them up to scratch. And then you come in, you polish it up, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, when you're dealing with a personality like Charles Mingus, that kind of organization was going to just be impossible. That's not the way he worked.
Yeah, and he had such great ideas, and
yes.
And there, and the one thing I'll say, one thing for the chaos, and I'll leave the Mingus discussion, but occasionally that sort of chaos, like in Pithecanthropus erectus, where it all just falls apart, and then it comes back together, just really swinging hard. There are some really exciting moments when the chaos resolves.
There are absolutely, and I think, again, like you said, with Charles Mingus, it's not like the records of Miles Davis's records, which were always exquisitely recorded, the best of circumstances. The band was rehearsed. The setting was fantastic. Even with Monk, the setting was always, what's the word? It was always doable. There were a couple of moments, there's some of those records, like with Monk's Mood, with Art Blakey, and Epistrophe and things like that. Some of those things kind of fell apart. Charles Rouse, his father died, and then he had to come back into the studio to record Underground, with Monk. There are some, specific situations. Brilliant Corners, which was on the verge of disaster because Oscar Pettiford was misbehaving in the studio. And so, yeah, there are always some close calls. There's the record Milestones, where Miles Davis is playing piano on Weirdo or Sid's Ahead because something happened and apparently Red Garland got bent out of shape and he left. So, you're always going to get those kinds of circumstances where you have to make do with the situation, But like I said, just again, in terms of, you get Charles Mingus's, any of Charles Mingus's sessions, we're going to include all of those things all the time.
So what about your own? I got to ask you then about your own recordings, and you've made an impressive catalog at this point. and it just seems to be getting better. You know, you're adding to it. Like I believe the new record actually adds to your legacy. It's not just like, oh, here's another record, right? Do you feel like you're getting everything you need? You know, when you go into the studio to make a record like this, do you feel like, okay, I had enough rehearsal time, I've got the right engineer, there's enough support? Do you feel like you get that?
No. This last record was made somewhat in haste because of time constraints, but we did rehearse, we did record, but not the most ideal setting. The most ideal setting gives me several days to rehearse, 2 or 3, maybe even 4 days to record and produce and see the vision come to fruition in the way that I need it to. And, you know, all the way down to the miking, the mixing, and the sound. So I haven't made a record yet where I've been 100% satisfied and said, yeah, that's the one, that right there. But I've been content with the way the records have turned out.
I mean, it seems like a lot of my favorite artists say that no matter how much budget, no matter how much rehearsal. I mean, John Lennon, said there's not one of the Beatles records he wouldn't have redone. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Well, you grow and then you hear things 10 years after the fact. It's like, man, that's what I was thinking 10 years ago. So I have to accept, it's like, listen, when I was 25, I made The Swingin' Eye, Pure Imagination, It's All Right to Swing. That's where I was then. And I am happy with what I did at that moment. I would, of course, do some things differently now, but that's not how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, your take of We Shall Overcome, I personally wouldn't change a thing on that. I don't, that to me is, you used the word exquisite earlier. That to me is an exquisite but very sensitive performance of that very important piece of music.
Thank you. That stays in the book. That's a part of my repertoire. Stablemate stays in the book. Again, more of my musical arsenal, if you will, includes my background in the church, my spirituality, my thoughts and views on the world, on politics, on people, on humanity. Whereas before, it was about upholding the tradition, making sure I was paying homage to Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell and Art Tatum, and making sure I was dotting the I's and crossing the T's, have all your tunes learned, be able to play in all the tempos, all the keys, be able to play behind a singer, be able to comp, be able to solo, be able to write, be able to arrange, be able to do interviews, all these things that you're kind of pushed into doing early on. And now I finally feel as though I'm just becoming a whole person. I'm really finding myself. I'm going to be doing that the rest of my life.
And you can hear that in your music.
Thank you.
But Ken, you hear that in your music. I guess I should make that a question.
I can feel it in my music. I can feel it. I don't know if I can always hear it. It kind of depends on where I am, but I can feel it at the moment. Sure.
Yeah. So what do you do next? I mean, do you think that far ahead, or
what I do next is go to a meeting after I talk with you, and then whatever happens after the meeting happens. I have learned this COVID thing, if it's taught me nothing else, it's taught me that plans can change, and it reminds me that God, man plans and God laughs. So all this, what's happening next year, 5 years from now, nah, except for like retirement. Okay, I'm investing in that, but everything else, I'm taking one day at a time, one foot in front of the other.
Are you writing, music? Are you like working on
Absolutely.
compositions?
Always. I'm going to be writing some things for some of my students to learn and to play. I'm getting more into creating compositions that serve as educational guides and exercises for them, because you can always draw on the repertoire. You can draw on everything from Jelly Roll Morton up to Emmanuel Wilkins. You can draw on all of that. But I want to make things specifically for, I have a dozen students so that are studying privately with me. So I want to create things that are specific to their particular technical challenges.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see, you know, like I hope I live another 20, 30 years so I can see what happens to those students. It's
Yes,
always
indeed.
fascinating to me because I've seen a lot, you know, I've been around long enough to I've seen a lot of the ones that study with Jerry Coker and Donald
Yes.
Brown and
Yes.
Mark and everybody. It's been fun to see what they go out and do, you know, and see. And sometimes you
Indeed.
can almost hear the imprint of the teacher a little bit.
Yes. That I don't want. I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. I'm determined to help these students to become their individual selves and not have any trace of me at all. I have no idea how to do that, but I do know you don't teach them how to play like you. When you start hearing yourself, you go, okay, you know what? Do something else. I just played that. You play something else.
But there's a transmission of spirit that happens. I think that's very, very natural and good, right? You know what I mean?
Sure. If they get anything from me, I want them to get the positive side of my humanity, hopefully.
Who was that teacher for you?
My father. My father was my biggest hero, my most important teacher, because I just watched him. I watched him, I listened to him, and I watched how he and my mom interacted with each other. I listened to what they told me, and I paid attention, and I argued, and I chucked some stuff. I embraced and digested some stuff, and they did right by me. You know, they weren't perfect people. When I first became aware of the fact that they were humans, that kind of messed me up. But every adult, you know, realizes that about their parents. But you know, they instilled so many profound and wonderful things in me that I will carry the rest of my days and hopefully spread and share it to other people. Just about being kind and loving to people and being hardworking. You know, my parents were Depression era children, and they learned how to stretch a penny, you know. And so we never went without. My parents were solidly middle class. We weren't rich. We didn't get everything we wanted, but we had everything we needed. The lights were never out. We never went hungry. And I'll always be grateful to them for that, for being strong parents and just doing the best they possibly could, which I believe most parents are doing. Nobody gets it perfectly, but most parents they're doing their level best or trying to.
Yeah, you sound like you described my parents. You know, it's like, and it's weird because I think it took. I haven't. I don't know if I've confessed this publicly before, but I was pretty stupid for a long period of time, and it was like years later. I felt like my dad in particular it was rubbing off a little bit, and he was trying to get it to rub off earlier. But
I think the thing is, it's like, you know, I now use the joke that my father uses. I said, you know what, I'm not young enough to know everything. And I always say this to students who challenge me on stuff. And it's always a thing that kind of goes over their head. I said, yeah, well, I hear what you're saying. I'm not really young enough to know anything, to know everything. In fact, the older I get, I find that I have more questions and fewer answers.
yeah, well, here's to those questions. They keep us going.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, Eric Reed, the new record For Such a Time as This. It's been #1 for 3 weeks on the jazz charts. But not only that, it's just a dang good, solid, soulful, rich, multi-listenable record. And I want to thank you for making it.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you for playing it. Thank you, everyone, to WUOT, to again all the jazz radio stations and podcasts and blogs and live streaming. You know, we need people to listen to our music, and I want to continue to make music that people want to listen to for a very, very long time.
Sounds like a good deal to me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stop it.